Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Restless Killers and Mysteries with Roger Heilig, the show where we dive deep into some of the most shocking and perplexing criminal cases in history. This episode, and indeed our entire podcast, is proudly sponsored by Beyond the Grassy Knoll, How JFK's Death Changed American Society Forever by A.M. Wolfe. If you're a history buff or a conspiracy theory enthusiast or both, you'll definitely want to check it out on Amazon and Audible. Today, we're embarking on a journey that is as tragic as it is unsettling. We're going to talk about the Chris Benoit tragedy. If you're a wrestling fan, the name Chris Benoit likely brings a barrage of memories, both good and unbelievably harrowing. But even if wrestling isn't your cup of tea, this case is a roller coaster, and I promise you'll be gripped by the twists and turns. So, what exactly happened? On a seemingly ordinary weekend in June 2007, the world of professional wrestling was rocked to its core. Chris Benoit, a high-flying, technically skilled wrestler with a significant fan base, was found dead, along with his wife Nancy and their 7-year-old son Daniel. What initially appeared to be an unspeakable mystery soon unraveled into a deeply disturbing narrative of a double murder-suicide. In today's episode, we'll break down this tragic story, segment by segment, to provide a nuanced and comprehensive account. We'll start by setting the scene and getting to know the man behind the controversy, Chris Benoit. We'll touch on his illustrious wrestling career, his public persona, and some personal anecdotes that provide a fuller picture of who he was. Then, we'll walk through the grimly fascinating details of how the tragedy unfolded. From the first moments of shock to the complex web of events that culminated in a devastating loss of life, we'll cover it all. The initial confusion within the wrestling community and the broader public reaction will set the stage. Following that, we delve into the specifics of the crime itself. We'll discuss what investigators found at the crime scene, the timeline of events, and the unsettling evidence that revealed how Benoit's actions led to this heart-wrenching conclusion. The media's response to the tragedy was immediate and frenzied, and we'll explore how both the press and the public reacted. The WWE's reaction, including their initial tributes and subsequent retractions, added another layer of complexity to an already bewildering case. Finally, we'll discuss the outcome of the investigation, including the autopsy results and the controversial theories that emerged in its wake. We'll finish off by examining the long-term impact on the WWE and the broader wrestling community, focusing on policy changes and the ongoing discussions around mental health and steroid abuse. So, sit back, get comfortable, and let's take a deep dive into one of the darkest chapters in the history of professional wrestling. This is Restless Killers and Mysteries, and I'm your host, Roger Heilig. Let's get started. Chris Benoit, a name that sends shivers down the spine for anyone familiar with the world of professional wrestling. For those who are new to this, let me walk you through who this man was before the tragic events that etched his name into infamy. Born in Canada in 1967, Chris Benoit, also known as the Canadian Crippler and the Rabid Wolverine, began his wrestling journey at a young age. Inspired by the legendary Dynamite Kid, Chris sculpted his body and honed his craft, setting his sights on the grand stage of professional wrestling. He started his career in the late 1980s, gaining momentum and recognition in Japan and Mexico. Now, think of him as the wrestling equivalent of rock and roll. He was passionate, intense, and never did anything halfway. Benoit made his way to World Championship Wrestling, WCW, in the mid-90s, where he became part of the iconic Four Horsemen stable. This wasn't just any group. It was as if the wrestling gods had assembled their own Mount Rushmore. Benoit's intense, hard-hitting style elevated him to fan-favorite status, and he quickly earned a reputation as a wrestler's wrestler, meaning he was revered not just by fans, but by those within the industry as well. Now, the late 90s were a wild time for wrestling, and Benoit jumped ship to World Wrestling Federation, WWF, in 2000. The WWF, which later became WWE, was like the Hollywood of wrestling, all bright lights and big personalities. Here, Benoit truly made his mark, capturing multiple championships, including the big one, the World Heavyweight Championship. Imagine the Oscars, but with more body slams and steel chairs. His crowning moment came at WrestleMania 20 in 2004, when he won the World Heavyweight Championship in Madison Square Garden. It wasn't just a win, it was a tear-jerking, confetti-filled coronation that made fans believe in fairy tales. Despite his aggressive in-ring persona, Chris was known to be a quiet and somewhat reserved individual in his personal life. Fellow wrestlers often described him as a hardworking, dedicated family man who loved his wife, Nancy, and their son, Daniel, more than anything. Nancy Benoit, known to wrestling fans as Woman, had her own storied career in professional wrestling. Together, they were viewed as the quintessential wrestling power couple. Think of a royal family, but with more spandex and pyrotechnics. Benoit was no stranger to personal challenges. He suffered multiple injuries throughout his career, and continued to wrestle despite them. His dedication was almost superhuman. Like a gladiator, he fought through pain and adversity, Lesser-known facts include his obsession with perfecting his craft and his admirable loyalty to friends. One particularly touching anecdote is how he stayed by Eddie Guerrero's side, his best friend, during Guerrero's difficult times. Their friendship was the stuff of legend, perhaps the wrestling world's equivalent of Batman and Robin, bound by camaraderie and mutual respect. But Chris Benoit's life wasn't just all about wrestling, steel chairs, and high-flying maneuvers. He was a man of simple pleasures. He enjoyed spending time with his family, playing with his son, and was known to be an animal lover, particularly dogs. Behind that fierce exterior was someone who, like all of us, longed for love and normalcy. So, who was Chris Benoit? He was a complex character both inside and outside the squared circle. He was a man who achieved greatness, but whose story took an unexpectedly dark turn. Before the tragedy, Chris Benoit was someone revered, respected, and celebrated in the wrestling world. And as we delve further into this chilling tale, it's essential to remember the man he was and the shadow he cast over professional wrestling. As we peel back the layers, you'll discover a story that's both tragic and unsettling, making you question the very essence of where talent and turmoil intersect. Stay with me as we dive deep into the tragedy that shook the wrestling world to its core. In the sweltering heat of late June 2007, the wrestling world was about to be rocked by a series of events so devastating, it would leave an indelible mark on the industry and its fans. Over a heart-wrenching 3-day period, one of the most admired and respected figures in professional wrestling, Chris Benoit, would go from hero to perpetrator in a tragedy that no one could have seen coming. It all began on June 22, 2007. Chris Benoit was scheduled to participate in a WWE event, but he unexpectedly canceled his appearance, citing personal issues. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence for athletes to pull out of events due to personal matters, so the initial reaction from his fans and colleagues was one of understanding and curiosity. Yet behind the scenes, something much darker was brewing. Unbeknownst to many, Chris had already embarked on a path that would soon unravel lives. Over the course of these turbulent days, he would murder his wife, Nancy, and then their 7-year-old son, Daniel. The murders were carried out in chilling detail, with Nancy being slain in an upstairs room and the young Daniel following shortly after. Chris himself would end his life in the home, leaving behind a scene of utter horror and a flurry of questions. By June 24th, the air grew thick with concern. Chris had missed several appointments and had not made contact with anyone within his professional or personal circles. This uncharacteristic silence set off alarm bells, prompting WWE officials to reach out to local authorities in Georgia for a welfare check at the Benoit family home. When law enforcement arrived, the scene that greeted them was beyond macabre. It was tragically haunting. The initial shock within the wrestling community was palpable. Chris Benoit was not just any wrestler. He was a veritable titan of the ring, known for his technical prowess and dedication. His reputation was that of a family man, devoted to his wife Nancy, herself a well-known figure in the wrestling world as woman, and their son Daniel. Friends, fans, and colleagues were left in a state of disbelief, struggling to reconcile the benevolent image they had of Chris with the monstrous acts he had perpetrated. The news broke slowly at first, with rumors trickling through the wrestling community before exploding in national headlines. At first there was hesitation, a reluctance to believe that a beloved figure could commit such unfathomable deeds. When the reality set in, it was like a bombshell. Social media sites, wrestling forums, and news channels buzzed with theories, speculations, and heartbroken messages. The shock spiraled into a collective mourning, compounded by the unanswered question, why? In the midst of this turmoil, the WWE quickly issued statements, expressing their sorrow and solidarity with the affected families. Vince McMahon himself, the face of the WWE, appeared on television to convey the gravity of the situation. Yet, even as they responded publicly, behind the staunch corporate facade, the organization had to grapple with a rapid reassessment of Benoit's legacy and their own handling of the crisis. And so, over these 3 days in June 2007, the wrestling world buckled under the weight of its darkest hour. What began as a quiet shockwave turned into a hurricane of grief and confusion, stirring thoughts and emotions that would persist for years. The initial shock gave way to deeper inquiries, as the community began digging into Chris Benoit's life, his mental state, and the possible triggers leading to this tragedy. Alright, folks, here we delve into arguably the grittiest part of our story today. The details surrounding that fateful June weekend in 2007, when the wrestling world was left in utter disbelief. So, let's set the stage. It all began on a Friday, June 22nd. Chris Benoit was scheduled to perform at a WWE event in Beaumont, Texas. However, Benoit never showed up. Uncharacteristic for him, given his reputation for being a hardcore professional. That absence drew the initial flags that something was seriously wrong. As the weekend unfolded, the full horror began to surface. Investigators later pieced together a haunting timeline of events. On that Friday, Chris Benoit murdered his wife, Nancy. Nancy was found in an upstairs room bound at the wrists and feet. The cause of death? Asphyxiation. Investigators concluded she had been strangled to death with a cord. The chilling part is that Chris Benoit didn't stop there. The next day, Saturday, June 23rd, their 7-year-old son, Daniel, met a similarly tragic end. Daniel was found in his bed, also having died of asphyxiation. He had several needle marks in his arm, reportedly indicating that Benoit had been injecting him with a severe painkiller, possibly to sedate the boy before taking his life. Grim, isn't it? There's something profoundly tragic about the idea of a child being involved in this nightmare. Then, on Sunday, June 24th, Chris Benoit himself took his life. He used a weight machine in his home gym to orchestrate his demise, using the pull-down bar in a manner that would ensure quick fatality via asphyxiation. Imagine the scene: a home, once filled with the sounds of life and ordinary family activities, now eerily silent and harboring secrets of unspeakable tragedy. The sheer brutality and cold, methodical manner in which these acts were carried out left the investigators shell-shocked. Both Chris and Nancy were found with Bibles placed beside their bodies, a gesture that perplexed many and added a strange dimension to the already tragic scenario. Could it have been a moment of remorse, a plea for forgiveness, or perhaps an eerie ritual meant to offer some solace in his twisted reality? Upon the discovery of the bodies on Monday, June 25th, subsequent search and investigations ensued rapidly. Investigators uncovered various prescriptions in the house, which is where the theory of steroid-induced rage came into play. Chris Benoit had a collection of steroids and other drugs, which led people to speculate about the impact of these substances on his mental state. The crime scene itself painted a horrific picture. Walls imbued with anger, despair, and confusion. Even technology played an odd role in this story. In the early hours of Sunday, June 24th, Chris Benoit had sent out eerie text messages to fellow wrestlers, detailing his address and giving oblique mentions like the dogs are in the enclosed pool area, essentially sealing his final moments in a strange digital confession. Evidence collected later would prove disturbing. It's not just the physical remnants but the psychological imprints that Benoit left behind, a deranged chronicle of a man at his breaking point. Investigators spent months dissecting Benoit's medical records, many notebooks filled with ramblings, and extensive interviews with friends and colleagues. Autopsy results revealed elevated levels of testosterone and traces of hydrocodone and Xanax, hinting at Benoit's ongoing battle with his mental health. Many theorized if this was a case of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a brain condition commonly associated with repeated head injuries, a prevalent concern in contact sports like wrestling. We'll discuss more about this in the investigation and legacy segments, but it's a crucial point here as it might give a glimpse into Benoit's deteriorating mental state. The timeline, the methods, the unsettling calm with which Benoit executed these atrocities, each facet providing a piece of the morbid puzzle. A family, erased over a span of 3 days, a sport left to grapple with the horrifying aftermath, and a society forced to confront uncomfortable truths about idolizing flawed heroes. No doubt, the specifics of this tragedy read like a grim soap opera, blending a perfect storm of personal turmoil, professional pressures, and perhaps a lethal cocktail of chemical dependence. But it's these very details that help us endeavor to understand, to parse through the catastrophe, in hopes of grasping what might drive someone to such devastating extremes. When news broke on June 25, 2007, that Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel had been found dead, the wrestling world and mainstream media erupted in a whirlwind of shock and confusion. At first, many couldn't understand. How could this beloved wrestling icon, known for his dedication in the ring, be involved in something so horrific? The initial wave of media coverage painted Benoit as a tragic hero. News outlets reported the deaths as a mysterious incident, sparking immense speculation. In this digital age, social media went ablaze with tributes and heartfelt messages from fans and fellow wrestlers alike. It was an outpouring of grief, blended with confusion, as everyone speculated on what could have led to this tragic end. Over at WWE headquarters, the reaction was one of profound sorrow and disbelief. Chris Benoit was a heavy hitter in their roster, a man not just admired for his technique but respected for his work ethic. WWE Chairman Vince McMahon made the immediate decision to cancel the scheduled WWE Raw episode. Instead, the company aired a 3-hour tribute show in honor of Benoit, celebrating his in-ring accomplishments with clips and personal remembrances from colleagues. This tribute initially seemed appropriate as no concrete details had yet emerged, but the clouds of sorrow began darkening quickly as the horrific truth started to unfold. When police reports confirmed that Benoit was responsible for the deaths of his wife and son before taking his own life, the story took a dramatically different tone. The media quickly shifted gears, moving from sorrowful tributes to a detailed dissection of the monstrous acts committed by Benoit. Headlines morphed from "Wrestling World Mourns Loss" to "Benoit Family Tragedy and Strange Behavior Explained." The WWE found itself in a precarious position. Initially, there was some understandable foot dragging. The show must go on. mentality is the lifeblood of such organizations. But as more gruesome details were released, it became impossible for WWE to ignore or continue in their initial stance. They had to act, and quickly. In an unprecedented move, WWE retracted all celebratory content related to Benoit, erasing him from their history almost overnight. His mentions were scrubbed from websites, video archives, promotional material. Essentially, Benoit became a ghost of WWE's past. It was a dramatic, necessary step as the company tried to distance itself from the horrific shadow he had cast. The public response was a mixture of heartbreak and fury. Fans who had idolized Benoit felt betrayed, as if a family member had committed an unforgivable sin. There was a distinct split: those who tried to separate the man from the athlete, mirroring the initial media exchanges, and those who could see nothing but the dark acts overshadowing every wrestling move Benoit had ever performed. Grieving fans were left wondering how someone who seemed so disciplined and devoted could commit such unspeakable acts. Some turned to the media for answers. Others simply wanted to forget. Debates on platforms like Twitter and Facebook became heated and personal, with each user interpreting the situation through their own unique lens. This tragedy also ignited a firestorm of scrutiny regarding the culture of professional wrestling itself. Questions arose about the physical and mental toll the sport took on its stars. The media delved into investigations on steroid use, severe head trauma, and concussions, elements speculated to have played a role in Benoit's shocking behavior. To some, Chris Benoit became a case study in the perils of untreated mental health issues. To others, this was proof of a sinister undercurrent in professional wrestling that needed to be addressed. The tragedy forced the entire industry to take a closer look at the well-being of its athletes. In the immediate aftermath, WWE's quick retraction and the media's exhaustive coverage were critical in shaping public perception. For many, the swift removal of Benoit from WWE history was necessary to keep the legacy of wrestling clean. For others, the ordeal sparked an everlasting debate over how we remember and reckon with our heroes when they fall from grace so catastrophically. Ultimately, the media reaction and public discourse following the Benoit tragedy became just as much a part of the narrative as the horrific events themselves, framing how we process and cope with such an unfathomable act within the tapestry of public consciousness. The investigation into the tragic events surrounding the deaths of Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel was intense and thorough. Let's dive into the details of what the authorities uncovered. The crime scene itself was a testament to the horror that had unfolded within the Benoit home. Authorities discovered the bodies over a 3-day period, with Nancy being found first in an upstairs room, bound and showing signs of strangulation. Daniel was discovered in his bedroom, also bound and apparently asphyxiated, seemingly while sleeping. Chris Benoit's body was located in the basement gym, where he had hanged himself using the pulley of a weight machine. Initial reports sent shockwaves through the wrestling community and the wider public. It seemed inconceivable that a man like Benoit, known for his discipline and dedication in the WWE, could perpetrate such a horrific act. As investigators pieced together the timeline, they found that the nightmare began on Friday, June 22, 2007. Nancy was killed first, followed by Daniel on Saturday. Chris Benoit then committed suicide on Sunday. This timeline exposed a methodical progression, each tragic act separated by hours or even a day, suggesting a deeply disturbed state of mind. Autopsy results provided a clearer picture of the circumstances. It was confirmed that Nancy's death was caused by asphyxiation, and toxicology reports indicated she had a sedative in her system, possibly to subdue her before the attack. Daniel's death was similarly attributed to asphyxia, but the results also showed elevated levels of Xanax in his body. This led to the assumption that the sedative was administered to him, likely to ensure he was unconscious when the act occurred. Chris Benoit's autopsy revealed heavy brain damage and heart abnormalities, conditions that raised further questions about his health and mental state. One of the most contentious points revolved around the condition of Chris Benoit's brain, examined posthumously by Dr. Julian Bales, a noted neurosurgeon. It was discovered that Benoit's brain displayed severe CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a condition resulting from repeated head trauma. CTE is known for triggering serious cognitive, emotional, and behavioral issues, and this revelation opened a Pandora's box of discussions about the impact of professional wrestling on mental health. Theories and controversies did not stop at the medical findings. Some speculated the influence of steroid use, given the presence of anabolic steroids and other prescription drugs found in Benoit's home. This led to a frenzy of debate over the culture within the wrestling industry, where performance-enhancing drugs were rumored to be widespread. WWE responded with their wellness program, intended to curb drug abuse among wrestlers, but critics argued it was a case of too little, too late. Public opinion was further splintered by discussions over how the WWE managed their stars' mental health and the pressures placed upon them to perform at increasingly high levels. The combined stress from personal loss, professional pressure, and potential substance abuse created a cocktail of disaster waiting to implode. Finally, investigators concluded that Chris Benoit had murdered his wife and son before ending his own life. Despite varied theories attempting to rationalize his actions, the motive remained elusive, shrouded in the complexities of a troubled mind and a physically deteriorating body. The investigators' conclusions painted a depressing portrait of a man driven to unspeakable acts by factors that may never be fully understood. The media storm and public reaction further highlighted the need for serious conversations about mental health, substance abuse, and the dark side of professional wrestling's glory. To this day, the Chris Benoit tragedy remains a chilling reminder of the hidden battles that individuals might face, unknown to even those closest to them. The horror of the Chris Benoit tragedy left an indelible mark, not only on the WWE but on the entire realm of professional wrestling. The ripple effects from that catastrophic event transformed the industry in significant, and some might say, much-needed ways. Let's start with the immediate aftermath. The WWE had to reassess its policies dramatically. First up was their drug testing program. While steroid use and performance-enhancing drugs had long been a poorly kept secret in the business, Benoit's actions thrust the issue into an unwanted spotlight. Steroids were found in his system, and there were links to a physician who had been prescribing these substances to other wrestlers. As a result, WWE's wellness policy, which had already been established in 2006 following the highly publicized deaths of other wrestlers, received an overhaul. The program became stricter and more comprehensive. Random drug testing was ramped up, and the substances being tested for expanded. Wrestlers could no longer rely on a don't ask, don't tell mentality around drugs. WWE wasn't willing to take any more chances, not on its brand, not on its stars, and certainly not on its fans. Wrestler health and wellness became more prioritized than ever before. Beyond drugs, mental health came into sharp focus. Chris Benoit's mental state at the time of his crimes was scrutinized heavily. Post-mortem examinations of his brain revealed the kind of severe damage one would expect from someone much older, someone with dementia, due to the numerous concussions he had sustained while wrestling. This brought forth a serious discussion on the mental health risks professional wrestlers face, given the nature of their jobs. Concussion protocols were introduced, and WWE started to take a hard line on the kinds of moves that were allowed in the ring. The infamous chair shot to the head became a thing of the past. Moves and tactics that could potentially endanger a wrestler's cognitive health were systematically banned. Wrestlers were also given access to mental health professionals and encouraged to seek help when needed, breaking down the stigma that often surrounds mental health, particularly in such a physically demanding sport. The tragedy also exposed another dark side of professional wrestling: the massive amount of stress and pressure wrestlers face. A heightened awareness around mental well-being meant that wrestlers had to be seen in a holistic way, beyond their physical prowess and entertainment value. WWE began to offer counseling and other resources to deal with the intense and often brutal demands of life on the road, away from family for long stretches, and the constant pressure to deliver stellar performances. Such changes have had ripple effects across the industry. Other wrestling promotions, taking notes from WWE's revamped policies, have also started implementing more stringent health and wellness measures. It created a shift in how the wrestling community and its fans view a wrestler's career longevity and personal well-being. The macho, invincible persona often portrayed in the ring began to give way to a more nuanced understanding that these performers are, after all, human and vulnerable. While Benoit's actions can never be justified or forgotten, the silver lining, if there can be one, is the positive strides made in the industry's approach to health and wellness. More importantly, the tragedy opened up conversations that had long been swept under the mat. Today, fans see a wrestling match with the unshakable knowledge that behind the body, slams and suplexes are individuals with very real health concerns and lives that extend well beyond the squared circle. One cannot discuss the legacy without mentioning the change in how the WWE Hall of Fame is viewed. Chris Benoit's name was practically erased from WWE history books, an unparalleled move for someone who had achieved so much in the ring. This decision underscored the idea that character and actions outside the ring mattered just as much, if not more, than accomplishments within it. And let's not forget the important ongoing discussion on steroid use and its dangers. Wrestling organizations now openly educate their talents on the risks of anabolic steroids and similar substances. What used to be the dark underbelly of professional wrestling is now a topic tackled head-on, with a commitment to transparency and education. In conclusion, while the Chris Benoit tragedy remains one of the darkest chapters in professional wrestling history, it prompted a wave of crucial reforms. It forced the industry to take a hard look at itself, leading to necessary and overdue changes that prioritize wrestler health and well-being. Though the loss and horror cannot be undone, these changes are an effort to ensure that such a tragedy won't be repeated, marking a step in the right direction for the future of professional wrestling. And there you have it, folks. Today we've navigated through the deeply unsettling Chris Benoit tragedy, a dark chapter in professional wrestling and in the lives of those involved. We started by learning about Benoit's celebrated career and persona within the WWE. We then journeyed through the chilling sequence of events that took place over 3 harrowing days in June 2007, culminating in the horrifying discovery of 3 lives lost. We dove into the meticulous details of the crime itself, uncovering the evidence and timeline that painted a grim picture of that tragic weekend. We also took a closer look at the media's immediate response and the public's reaction, not to mention how WWE initially honored Benoit only to backtrack upon realizing the gravity of the situation. Moving forward, we explored the extensive investigation that led to the definitive conclusion that Chris Benoit murdered his wife Nancy and their young son Daniel before taking his own life. We touched on some of the controversies and conspiracy theories that emerged, adding layers of complexity to an already incomprehensible event. And finally, we examined the lasting legacy of this tragedy on professional wrestling. We discussed how it prompted significant changes in the WWE's policies regarding wrestler health and wellness, and shed light on critical issues like mental health and steroid abuse within the industry. If today's episode left you with more questions or sparked thoughts you'd like to share, I encourage you to reach out. Your insights and comments are always welcome. Before we sign off, a huge thank you to our sponsor, Beyond the Grassy Knoll: How JFK's Death Changed American Society Forever by A.M. Wolfe. If you're looking to dive into another intriguing piece of American history, this book promises a captivating read and is available now on Amazon and Audible. Stay tuned for our next episode of Restless Killers and Mysteries with Roger Heilig, where we'll unravel yet another baffling and dark mystery. Until then, keep your curiosity alive, stay safe, and thank you for listening.